Chapter 11. How to get people to cooperate with each other. We must now discuss the elusive topic of group morale. What is it about some leaders that enables them to so construct their group or their family that there is always high esprit de corps and a tight alliance to one another? And why is it that others who seem to be inspiring enough in a one-on-one exchanges always end up with groups that fracture and fight and can never get anything done efficiently? The leader who can learn the laws of group morale becomes a high valuable commodity, for not only does good esprit de corps enable people to get the job done in half the time, it also draws in new people. Some of the most successful churches, for instance, are led by pastors who do not have magnetic personalities. Their success is due rather to the skill with which they build an enthusiastic, cohesive congregation. So in such cases, people are drawn not too much to the leader, but to the group feeling, the high energy atmosphere. Good leaders set out to do far more than build allegiance to themselves, which is important, of course, but it's not enough. It is also necessary to build into the organization an alliance to each other. Rule number 10 for bringing out the best in people. Place a premium on collaboration. Organizers of successful groups base their work on a fundamental fact about the makeup of the human personality. Most of us can function best when teamed up with at least one other person. I think, for instance, of the encouragement and solidarity that exists between many husbands and wives who are building something together. Writing is the hardest work I've ever attempted, and quite literally could not do it without Diane. This chapter is being written at St. Andrew's Priory, a Benedictine retreat 80 miles away from my home in Los Angeles. A few days of solitude like this are a wonderful stimulant, but I would not be typing here at midnight if I did not feel very closely linked to the woman asleep alone in our bed tonight. She's not there because she likes solitude, but because she knows that it is terribly important for me to get this chapter finished and in the mail this week. In the discouraging years when all my work was rejected by publishers, I simply would have quit had it not been for the cheerful, blithe confidence Diane continued to display. One person against the many is seldom a match, but two people? That's a different story. If one can find one other person who will join you in your quest, you have not doubled your capabilities, you have increased them exponentially. The same principle applies to losing weight, abstaining from alcohol, or learning a language. There is power in numbers. Being a group hardens your resolve, and it gives you momentum for bursting through obstacles. The need to belong. In every person there resides a basic need that in the technical books on this topic is called the affirmative motive. Each of us likes to belong to some group of tightly knit people where we are known and accepted, where we are committed to each other, and where we know that our other members of the group will be loyal to us if we are in trouble. It is the old tribal instinct. Ideally, this will occur in our families where people forgive anything. When such devotion is cultivated in families, people may stray away for a while, but they inevitably return. If such a loyalty develops in a group of employees, it has a similar adhesive effect. People will stay on your staff even when they could earn more money in another company, for important psychological need is being met by their employer. They need to belong. It is not as some suppose that anyone has much allegiance to a company. The company man is a phenomenon of the past, if in fact such a person ever existed. Who has ever had much loyalty to a company? But we do have lots of ties to the rather amorphous entity comprised of people with whom we have worked, to the traditions we have established for quality, and to the younger people who have come into the company and whose futures depend on what we build together. The following pages detail some characteristics that high morale organizations seem to have in common. Quality control. The best groups always take a great deal of responsibility for their own standards. Poor leaders make the mistake of remaining the sole custodian of quality control, whereas good leaders encourage people to hold each other accountable for excellence. Here's an example from manufacturing. When they got together to drink coffee, they would show each other their work, scoff at something that was poorly done, and admire what was good. I wasn't about to tamper with that clique and move the men around, because not only did each one of them take pride in his work, there was also a strange group pride at work there. It was important that they not allow anyone among them to fail. The consequences was that they all did better work because of the inner competition and loyalty. The foundry owner had learned the important lesson of allowing group morale to do much more of his work for him. Here's an example of the same principle at work in a family. At a banquet recently, I sat next to a charming woman whose 6 children had attended schools like Harvard, Stanford, and Wellesley. They were all achievers, with not a bad apple among them. How in the world did you inspire them? I asked. Everyone asked me that, she laughed. And the embarrassing thing is, I don't think I did much. For instance, I never told them to do their homework or scolded them when they were brought home poor grades. They seemed to motivate one another. For instance, I remember the day one of the daughters brought home a report card and it was less than it should have been. I didn't say anything and I put it back on the kitchen counter. But when her older brother came home, he looked at it, snorted, then went to her room and gave her a big pep talk. I'm not sure exactly what he said, but among other things, he convinced her that there were family standards which she was supposed to maintain, and that if she didn't do well, it would be a reflection on everyone. It must have been some speech because she dramatically raised her grades on the next report card. She looked up to her brother and loved him so much she would have done anything to stay in his good graces. That mother had wisely done almost exactly what the good executive does. She had built a group-wide appreciation for excellence, then let the group maintain it. All for one and one for all. A second characteristic of high morale group is this. Everyone believes that the leaders are putting the group's welfare first. There is always a large question in a person's mind when deciding how to enthusiastically join any organization. Are these leaders out for themselves and merely trying to whip up enthusiasm for their projects? Or will they make sure that this enterprise is beneficial for all of us? In companies where the prevailing philosophy is to get as much from the employees as possible and to give them as little as possible, new workers catch on very quickly and have no compunctions about sabotaging the management and carrying home supplies in their pockets every evening. By contrast, consider Andrew Carnegie, who took the position that no man can become rich without himself enriching others, and built a high morale organization that made him rich. If we can convince a group of people that it is all for one and one for all, great power can be released. Gene Rabu, head of the multinational Schlumberger Company, says the best way to get on in the world is to make people believe it is to their advantage to help you. Such a policy can be highly manipulative if we try to convince people that it is to their advantage to help us when it's not. On the other hand, if we believe in a project and are committed to collaboration as a means of achieving it, and we intend to share the dividends with our people, then we should be saying it to them over and over. The same principle applies to family leadership. When children believe that family rules are only for convenience of the parents, it is not very motivating. A girl may be convinced that her mother insists on certain kinds of behavior only because she does not want to be embarrassed before her friends. But if children can be persuaded that the family exists for everyone's benefit, and that the rules have been set up to help members function best, they will be much more sympathetic to the rules. Strong leadership, even autocratic leadership, can be tolerated by most people as long as it is clear that the leader is devoted to the good of all. In his book, The American Caesar, William Manchester tries to analyze the remarkable loyalty which Colonel Douglas MacArthur elicited from his men during World War I. When it was all over, MacArthur won 7 Silver Stars, 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, and the Distinguished Service Medal. Those medals were in part due to his bravery, of course, but they were also due to his ability to elicit a fierce loyalty from his troops. And how did he do that? Here is William McMaster's list. He was closer to their age than other senior officers. He shared his discomforts and their danger, and he adored them in return. That last phrase is the key. He adored them in return. For all his egomania and emotional distortions, MacArthur had one redeeming virtue which fired his men's passions. He cared for them deeply. Highly motivated groups know that their leaders love them profoundly and will be loyal to them to the end. Promises. The Center for Creative Leadership in Greensboro, North Carolina, recently studied 21 derailed executives, successful people who were expected to go on to higher in the organization, but who reached a plateau in their careers and were fired or were forced to retire early. They were compared with 20 arrivers, those who made it all the way up to the top. The researchers found the two groups astonishingly alike. Every one of the 41 executives possessed remarkable strengths, and every one was flawed by one or more significant weaknesses. So a person can make a lot of mistakes and have certain weaknesses, evidently, and still rise to success. But closer study of the derailed executives shows that certain types of flaws kept cropping up in a number of them, and that one error, when committed, always led to their downfall. The researchers called it the unforgivable sin. betraying a trust. Integrity here means more than simple honesty. It embodies consistency and predictability built over time that says, I will do exactly what I say I will do when I say I will do it. If I change my mind, I will tell you well in advance so you will not be harmed by my actions. Some of us make too many promises to too many people, and nothing demoralizes a group more quickly. Renee McPherson, who was Chief Executive Officer of Dana Corporation, when asked about the phenomenal success of that organization, says, the way you treat an employee is closely observed by all other employees. They decide whether you and your company can be trusted on the basis of that data. One might suppose that in a large organization, managers get away with treating a few people ruthlessly, but just one such example can destroy a whole group's morale. As McPherson says, everyone is watching how you treat the employees with the assumption that they will be treated in the same way. Families also keep an eye on their leadership for such tip-offs. If a father promises his son a car when he reaches 17 and then doesn't deliver, he not only has destroyed that boy's trust, but has damaged the family's spirit as well. For all the other family members have been watching that betrayal. It behooves us to go to considerable lengths to show people that we will make good on our contracts to them. Otherwise, they will keep brakes on their enthusiasm. Fairness. Another demoralizing tactic is to distribute rewards unfairly. Much research has been done on what has been labeled equity theory, but which is instinctively known to every good leader. People's motivation collapses completely if they feel someone else is being compensated or rewarded differently. A fascinating study was done in 1972 by Schmidt and Marvel, in which pairs of workers were given the choice of working separately for little money or working with another person for money. The catch was this: although both would be paid more, if they worked together, one was to be paid more than the other for the same job. It was an unequal distribution of compensation, with no apparent reasons for the unfairness. Fully 40% of the pairs chose to work for less money than to accept the lopsided compensation. The study dramatizes our powerful need to be treated fairly. It is probably the reason so-called merit pay for teachers is not the answer to America's educational failings. You do not motivate people by coming into the school and labeling 15% of staff as master teachers. It may motivate them, but what happens to the other 85% who are not so designated? Think of your own job. Suppose someone came into your place for work, evaluated everybody's performance, labeled 15% of those doing the same work as master workers, and gave them a 25% wage premium over everybody else. Would productivity go up or down? To ask the question is to answer it. Lester C. Thurow tells about teaching his two different university economics departments. Both were famous for their research, but one was famous for its good teaching, while the other was infamous for its bad teaching. There were no significant differences in the ways in which people were paid or in the size of the salary differentials. Good teaching, he decided, occurred in one because there was a strong social ethos that good teaching was your first responsibility and would be rewarded with peer respect. That whole ethos could have been destroyed if teachers were treated unequally. Nice guys often make poor bosses for similar reasons. If you bend the rules for certain people, it causes confusion among the staff and a drop in morale. But trying to stay on good terms with everyone and making too many exceptions to company rules, you appear to care more for the happiness of particular individuals than for the well-being of the whole working group. It violates one of motivational's basic principles: fairness. The preservation of the individual. Another ingredient for good morale is closely allied to the one we've just been discussing. The members must know that they will never get lost in the group. Here is a paradox. We can allow ourselves to be absorbed into a group most readily when we are assured that the leaders will value our individuality. Collectivism scares us even if we think that people will become expendable for the sake of the larger group. When A.W. Clausen was head of the Bank of America, he was asked by Harvard Business Review about his rise from clerk to chief executive officer. In that revealing interview, Clausen talked with genuine affection about various colleagues in his firm, about the older executives from whom he had learned the ropes, and about lower echelon employees. It was obvious that the people were important to him. An illustration of how his policy works followed an interview. It was the story of a middle-aged Bank of America executive who had a great deal of pride. He had been with the firm for 25 years when his performance deteriorated. The spark wasn't there anymore, and he was absent for long periods of time for medical reasons. His supervisors decided that he was under-challenged, so they moved him to a different assignment at a very busy branch. After 30 days, the old habits returned. He couldn't remember customers he'd worked with just a day before, and he'd go home early with chest pains. The district manager asked him if he thought any portion of his illness could be psychosomatic. "Yes, I do," he said. "The pains are severe, believe me, but when I'm tested, the doctors don't find anything." His superiors then offered him a lower level job with less pressure and responsibility, but where he would lose his title. "I couldn't handle that," he said, and his boss replied, "I don't blame you. I don't think I could either." Many companies would have given up at this point and terminated the man, but for Bank of America, it was back to the drawing board. Further investigation showed that the only time he was motivated occurred each evening when he worked as a volunteer in charitable organizations. His wife had his clothes laid out when he arrived home from work, and he hurried to his second office where he put on several hours of pleasurable work. To the credit of the bank, they looked at the volunteer job to determine what they found appealing there and eventually found a similar post in their company. At last count, he was, after 2 years in the new job, happy and productive. "It was quite the experience," said the district manager, "to watch someone so totally disenchanted with himself and his career meet this problem head on and walk through it. All of us walked through it, and it was a great feeling, to tell you the truth." Clausen's group knew that if you can salvage one such employee, it has repercussions far beyond that one person. Many other workers are watching to see if that individual person actually does count in your company. Fun. The last characteristic of high morale organizations, they seem to have fun together. Too often, the parent or the manager is guilty of growling, "Okay, we've had enough fun, let's get back to work," when the best work could have been done while having fun. Thomas A. Edison once received a letter from a Solomon stockholder. "A vice president of your company," he wrote, "doesn't have a proper sense of dignity of his position and of his association with you. I'm told sometimes his laugh can be heard through the door and all over the office." Edison sent the letter to the vice president tied to the framed picture of a laughing, jolly friar. Hanging his picture in the entrance hall, he wrote, "Have everyone around the office look at it. Let it be a constant reminder that good business is never done except in a reasonably good-humored frame of mind and on a human basis." I was interviewed once by a committee that laughed more frequently than any group of people I had ever seen. They have been meeting at least once a week for long sessions, and though they were very different individuals, they worked together with a minimum of friction and with great enthusiasm. The secret, I think, was their laughter. The chairman, Harry Griffin, had structured a group that way from its inception. His philosophy was, "We're going to be together for hundreds of hours before this job is done. If we choose, we can grit our teeth and try to get it over as soon as possible, with no monkey business allowed, or we can decide to have some fun every time we meet. I vote for having fun." That did not mean that they wasted their time, but that in their meetings they always laughed. There was lots of affectionate ribbing of one another, and the result was wonderful, which in return enabled them to finish their tasks months sooner than expected. People never get to laugh as much as they like or have as much fun as they want. So if you can construct your class, your team, or your committee so that laughter breaks out frequently, you'll have people clamoring to join your group. We were created to tease and play. Anne Sullivan was, as we said, a stern taskmaster and a very firm disciplinarian with Helen Keller. How was she able to get away with that, given her high-spirited young student? In part, it was because she mixed laughter and play with the rigors of their study and work together. Immediately after they had learned to communicate words with their fingers, Anne taught Helen how to play. "I had not laughed since I became deaf," Miss Keller says. One day she came to the room laughing merrily. She put my hand on her bright mobile face and spelled laugh. Then she tickled me into a burst of mirth and gladdened to the hearts of the family. Next she guided me through the motions of romping, swinging, tumbling, hopping, skipping, suiting the spelled word to each act. In a few days I was another child pursuing new discoveries through the witchery of teachers' finger spelling. Steps to building esprit de corps. So far, we've discussed certain qualities which characterize the best groups: quality control, mutual loyalty, integrity, fairness, and the assurance that members will be valued as individuals and play. Now let's turn to some specific techniques in which a leader can use to enhance team spirit we've been describing. 1. Reward cooperation. Some organizations are structured so that if you are part of a working group that produces strong results, you may get nothing. If, on the other hand, you torpedoed the success of others in order to chalk up personal achievements, you are praised. Obviously, such a policy invites backstabbing and bad morale. If it is only the prima donnas in the company who get the strokes, your organization may respond by producing more prima donnas. If it is the team players who are rewarded, your organization will produce a lot of collaborators. 2. Assign responsibility for group morale to the group itself. Peer pressure is always more successful than pressure from the top. So impress on the people in your committee or your family that part of their job is creating the right mood. That way, everyone is accountable for the level of morale. In short, you have taught them to be motivators. 3. Plan occasions when people can be away to gather. A curious thing happens when you take a group of people away from their ordinary surroundings. They become more creative, more open to new ideas, and they form strong bonds with each other rather quickly. So good leaders often take a day or two with their group at some location where they can cement relationships undistracted by regular routines. I often speak at meetings of law or accounting partners at resort areas where the firm has wisely retreated for a few days of regrouping, airing their objectives and problems, and getting better attuned to each other. When sales organizations want to weld their people into an enthusiastic group, they invite them to a hotel and a weekend of meetings. Comparing notes and joining in high-intensity group sessions, they discover a camaraderie that did not exist in their casual contact with each other in the office. Because they are together without any opportunity to talk to other people and get pulled down by some pessimistic voice, all competition for their energies has been excluded. 4. Assign a high value of communication. More often than not, when a group is fractured and people begin to fight each other, it is because of misunderstandings and small acts of inconsideration which have escalated into major grievances. In the next chapter, I will suggest some of the ways to eliminate intramural squabbling. But one way to head off this early is to make sure that there are regular opportunities for talk among the members. Families, for instance, need to do lots of communicating. It is a simple courtesy to leave notes on the kitchen counter telling the rest of the family where you've gone and when you expect to be back. Such habits are simple, but they do much to smooth the inner crossings which we must regularly make with one another. Many of us hate business meetings and committee meetings, but as much as we dislike them and as little as they sometimes may seem to accomplish, it is very important to give people an opportunity to talk about their activities, ask questions, and test future plans on each other. There's nothing that makes us feel shut out of a group faster than to discover other members have been informed about a topic we have been left in the dark about. Organizations fracture when information is dispensed primarily by the grapevine, or the grapevine is notorious discriminatory, certain people will know and others will not, and the people who are left out are certain to be malcontents. Management by friendship. Management, like parenting, is at its best when it is collaboration. The cynical statement of this principle is, it's not what you know, it's who you know. But both what you know and who you know are important. We do business with someone who proves to be knowledgeable, reliable, and enjoyable to work with, and we build a relationship of trust where we exchange favors and swap information. Over the years, it turns out the mutual benefit for everyone. The famous Dallas businessman John Stemmons, when asked for business advice, said this: find some people who are comers, who are going to be achievers in their own field, no matter what it is, and people you can trust. Then grow old together. Many people go all through life without discovering that principle. They assume that their success or failure in life is all their own doing, when in fact much of it is because others do or do not support them in their undertakings. Group loyalty is not blind allegiance, and it is not harboring incompetence, nor is it the sort of prejudicial blindness which supposes that everyone is wrong except our little group. Rather, it is an open-eyed acknowledgement that the people within our group may have their failings, but because we're in a group and because we have a history of mutual allegiance, we support one another. That is our contract.